Hi, welcome to my presentation. Today we'll be talking about brain plasticity, how the brain changes, and why it matters. On our agenda, we will do an introduction. We'll talk about what is brain plasticity, how brain plasticity works, types of plasticity, plasticity across the lifespan, brain plasticity in learning, real world examples, brain plasticity in therapy, why this topic matters, conclusion, and we'll look at my references. As an introduction, I'll tell you a little bit about me and why I chose this topic. My name is Ashley McCarthy. I'm currently a psychology student at Arizona State University. I am interested in counseling and understanding how people grow and change over time. I chose brain plasticity as my topic because it highlights that the brain is not fixed and that even patterns shaped by difficult experiences or trauma can change over time. This topic is meaningful to me because it supports a more empathetic perspective that people can move beyond survival based patterns and develop healthier ways of thinking, even if that process takes time and effort. As I continue into my master's in ASU counseling's program this fall, I'm especially interested in helping people build more adaptive and supportive thought patterns. So, what is brain plasticity? Brain plasticity, also called neuroplasticity, refers to the brain's ability to change and adapt over time. These changes don't just happen during major life events, but through everyday experiences, learning, and interactions with our environment. Instead of thinking of the brain as something that's fixed, it's more accurate to think of it as something that's constantly evolving. What we do, what we practice, and even what we go through can shape how our brain functions over time. Now let's explore how brain plasticity works. Brain plasticity works through changes and connections between neurons. When we learn or experience something new, neurons begin forming new connections. With repetition, these pathways become stronger and more efficient, which is why practice is so important for learning. At the same time, connections that are not used can weaken over time, which is where phrases like use it or lose it come to life. It allows the brain to stay efficient by strengthening what is important and reducing what is not. There are two main types of brain plasticity. Structural plasticity refers to physical changes in the brain, such as forming new neural connections through learning and experience. Functional plasticity refers to the brain's ability to reorganize itself, especially after injury. By shifting functions to different areas, as we see here in the diagram, structural plasticity is shown as the brain forming and strengthening connections over time, from weaker connections before learning to stronger connections after repeated practice. Functional plasticity is shown in how the brain can adapt after injury, where different areas begin to take over functions that were lost. Together, both types highlight how adaptable the brain is and how it supports learning, recovery, and overall development. All right, plasticity across the lifespan. Brain plasticity changes across our lifespan. In childhood, the brain is highly adaptable and rapidly forming new connections. During adolescence, the brain becomes more efficient through processes like synaptic pruning. In adulthood, plasticity continues but often requires more repetition and effort. Even in older adulthood, the brain is still capable of change, especially when individuals stay mentally active. Overall, while plasticity may slow over time, it never completely stops. This slide shows how learning and the brain influence each other. On the left, we can see how learning actually changes the brain. When we learn something new, the brain forms new neural connections. With repetition, those pathways get stronger, which is why practice is so important. Over time, skills become faster and more automatic because those connections are more efficient. On the right, we see how the brain supports learning. The brain is constantly adapting based on our experiences. As connections strengthen, our memory and overall performance improve. Something that I think is really important is that mistakes actually help this process. They give the brain feedback and allow it to adjust and improve. Overall, this shows that learning is not just something we do, it's something that physically reshapes the brain. The more we engage with something, the more our brain adapts to support it. All right, let's examine some real world examples. Brain plasticity shows up in everyday life. When we learn a new skill, like a language or instrument, the brain forms and strengthens neural connections through practice. It's also important in recovery from injury, where the brain can reorganize and adapt, especially with rehabilitation. Finally, plasticity plays a role in habit formation, where repeated behaviors become more automatic over time as neural pathways strengthen. Brain plasticity plays an important role in therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, focuses on identifying and changing negative thought patterns. Through repetition and practice, these new ways of thinking actually rewire neural pathways in the brain. Research has also shown that therapy is linked to measurable change in brain activity. In addition, behavior change works through similar principles. When new behaviors are practiced consistently, they strengthen neural connections and can eventually replace older, less helpful patterns. Overall, regardless of the specific type of therapy, having a strong foundation in how the brain works is incredibly important because it helps guide how we understand behavior, change, and the healing process. So, why does this topic matter? This topic matters because it shows the brain is not fixed. No matter what someone has been through, there's always potential for change over time. This is not just relevant for psychology or therapy, it applies to everyday life, learning, and personal growth. It also helps us better support people who are neurodivergent or recovering from injury by understanding that their brains may work differently, not incorrectly. Overall, understanding how the brain gives us both insight and hope and reminds us that growth and healing are always possible. In conclusion, brain plasticity shows that the brain is capable of change across the lifespan. Learning, experience, and environment all shape how the brain develops. This understanding provides insight into behavior, growth, and healing. It also helps us better support people who are neurodivergent or recovering from an injury. Overall, brain plasticity reminds us that change is possible, even if it takes time. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.